This is Deborah Norwood, and we are on Courageous Conversations with a dear friend, Deborah Joy Hart. And I must say that this is going to be a very exciting conversation with Deborah because Deborah impressed me greatly when I saw her TEDx talk. Her TEDx talk is called The 3P Practices for Grief. And what impresses me so much about our courageous conversation for today is that Deborah is a firm believer in humor for peace, as I am. Deborah is not only a registered nurse, a grief counselor, a certified laughter leader, a certified whatever. We've got lots of things that she can tell us who she is. But more than anything, she believes in humor for peace, and she uses humor with grief. So today is going to be a very, very different conversation about how we handle grief. And that's what I'm really looking forward to, because it's going to bring us a lot of resilience and hope when we learn a little bit more about how Deborah handles grief. So Deborah, welcome to our courageous conversation. I consider you to be one of the world's courage keepers. And I'm going to read this out for you, Deborah. You are an RN, BFA, CLLE, CT, CHIP, and certified joyologist. Oh my gosh, I have never known anybody that has so many letters after their name. What does this all mean? Who am I talking to?
It means you've been eating way too much alphabet soup. That's what it means. I have a lot of, I probably didn't even put them all, because after a while I start hearing E-I-E-I-O, and more than letters after my name. Just like you said, I really believe in the health and humor and healing with communicating with humor, with using humor in counseling sessions, using humor for so many reasons, and following both instinctively, because I've done it for so long, and following certain rules of the road for injecting humor in really hard situations. I became a. Go ahead.
Well, I guess if we're going to be talking about your credentials with humor, that's where the CHP and the CLLE come in, and that is certified humor professional, as well as a certified laughter leader expert level, a trailblazer actually. I do want to mention or ask, what does CT stand for?
CT stands for Certified Thanatologist, and that means thanatology is the study of death, dying, and bereavement and grief. And so through Association for Deaf Education and Counseling, I got that certification. It took a lot of study and a lot of classes to apply for it, and you have to take a pretty serious long test. And so it was a relief to become that. Many years ago, I got certified as a bereavement facilitator, and so I did that also. So, I have a lot of training this way. Let's just put it that way. I was a hospice nurse, long-term care nurse. I worked in communicable diseases. I've public health. So I've had a lot of nursing experiences, and they all converge onto a perspective of end of life. That's a great way to.
Yes, that's marvelous. And I think the other thing that impresses me about your dossier is that, like me, you have a belief that there's a spiritual component to humor and laughter as well. And I understand you're a minister. I also understand that you're a clown. Daisy the Clown has worked with, I think it's families with AIDS. Is that correct?
Back in the 90s, here in the Midwest, where it was becoming more and more known, someone started a camp just for families to be able to talk, to communicate, to learn, to engage, so they didn't feel isolated. And of course, their own grief system. So while I was a clown, I was also holding a lot of hands, a lot of hearts, and a lot of space for these families as they went through, in the beginning with AIDS. Oh my gosh, it was horrible, just horrible. So many deaths, so many unknowns, so much grief. And I was a clown. I blew up balloons, I did games, I did weird stuff. And if only for a moment I could relieve their grief, just for a moment. When in that moment, you take a breath and you reconnect. And there's a great poem by some anonymous clown that the gist of the poem is, when I see God, God says to me, when you made my people smile, you made me smile. And that's the end. And you know, that's everything to me. I mean, how does it get any better than this? Oh,
Very nice.
yeah.
Well, I have on with us Caroline Norwood Wells. She is our basic manager for Look Good, Feel Good Productions. And I know that Caroline has a question for you. I don't know if now's the right time to ask it. As I spoke a little earlier, there are certain, to me as a lawyer, I know that there are many kinds of grief. As a mediator, we were taught the Kubler-Ross, you know, a cycle of acceptance, death, and, you know, all of that stuff, which of course we've moved on beyond all of that now. But we do talk to the clients and have learned as mediators that death doesn't just mean the loss of a life. That death could mean the loss of a marriage through a divorce. Death can mean receiving information about your own personal health. Death can be the death of a dream when you realize you've reached a certain age or certain things haven't happened in your life. So when we speak about grief today, our audience is really everyone, anyone who has experienced any kind of a loss, including the loss of a pet, which I've seen your presentations, and I know that the loss of a pet is something that we've talked about. So what I would like to do is I would like us to address the TEDx talk, and if Caroline's available, maybe if Caroline has a question for you, we can start with her question.
Perfect. Caroline?
Yeah, yes, sorry. I have my little ones here with me. My question, I guess, to give you a little bit of background about myself, I have a chronic illness. And I blog about it. My blog is called Dysauto Mama. I have a condition called dysautonomia. And so I deal with the issues every day. And I've kind of found this world of people online who have chronic illnesses. And I try to find, you know, positive sources for them. And how can you, you know, work through the things that we deal with every day, being mothers at the same time or being parents working. And yes. And I guess my question for you would be, with someone who deals with a chronic illness, I feel like we deal with loss every day in small things, you know, loss of a dream, a loss of how we thought we would be, maybe even just a loss of how we feel that day, you know. And I think what would be your advice to someone who deals with something, it's not necessarily a huge tragic event, but it's tragic in moments?
That is a great question, Caroline. I'm so glad you asked that, because across the board, a loss is a loss is a loss. And one, people tend to categorize losses, and they don't give the people that are experiencing the loss permission because you look fine. What's wrong? I don't understand. And people take in other people's losses through their own lens. So if they've never had it, they don't know what they're talking about. So if they read about it, all of a sudden they're an expert. So that in itself becomes a loss. In my TEDx talk, I talk about 3 Ps that I think are really important in moving along in a loss. It's not like you're ever going to get over a loss. It becomes integrated. So let me just say that out loud for everybody, because too many people say, aren't you over that yet? And that's like, I have no words, because you're never over it. The best you can do is integrate it. How do you integrate? So the first thing, the very first thing, is you give yourself permission. The first P is permission to grieve it, the permission to feel it. Now, you don't have to tell everybody what you're feeling all the time, but you tell certain people who can honor that space. And here's something I have people do that I learned this from my own therapist, that on your, usually I wear like a Halloween, so you see my spine and my ribs and stuff. So you're gonna have to imagine this, but going down on your sternum, if you just go just a little bit, you're gonna find a tender spot. You'll know it when you feel it. You wanna push like about 2 pounds of pressure. And when you get to that spot, you wanna rub it in a circular motion and go, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. And that gives you permission right there and then to feel what you're feeling. So that's number one.
Beautiful, Deborah. That's beautiful, Deborah. I'm so grateful. And thank you, Caroline, for your question. I'm grateful for that first thing, you know, to put this finger here and just say, I'm okay, I'm okay. That's amazing. Amazing. So for those of you who are listening, Deborah's referring to her TEDx talk, and the name of the TEDx talk is a 3P practice for grief. And we can find that on TEDx, and I'll send you the link after this conversation. So continue, Deborah, with your Ps, your 3 Ps.
Thank you, thank you. So after you've given yourself permission, now I'm gonna tell you the truth about me. Sometimes I don't give myself permission to feel what I'm feeling. I go to special people and they say, it's okay. If I can't say it to myself, I go straight up to my husband and go, is it okay that I feel this way? And he goes, it's okay. And then I remember. So the first one is permission. The second one is perspective. Wow. I got to take a deep breath on that, because perspective is, Deb, you referred to it as altitude. Can you look at something a little differently? Can you let your mind wander? Because one, you have to admit what you have, which in this case is an autoimmune thing going on. It's a blood chemistry thing. Can you, with permission, can you move to perspective, saying, okay, I have this. Are there other ways of looking at myself and others so that I can create possibly another way of looking at it? For instance, some people say, why me? A perspective, as silly as this might sound, might be, why not you? A perspective, people often say in grief, God hates me. That's why I'm going through this. Could you give yourself a perspective of God does not hate you? Can you even change that more it's okay that God hates me, I'm going to love me. So it might sound bizarre, but can you get to that point of looking at it another way? And thirdly, there's the power to visualize. There are many people before me that have asked this question. If I wasn't feeling this way, how would I feel? Right? So that would be a perspective, but the power to visualize, such as in the loss of a job, at some point, can you visualize yourself working in your ideal job? What is your ideal job? Did you ever ask yourself, if I could do anything in the world, what would it be? Where would I work to make money? And asking yourself those questions help move you on. So in the case of autoimmune, can you ask yourself, yes, I have this autoimmune disease. Yes, I can elevate myself above it and not feel like I'm being attacked. And, you know, even with this disease, what are the things I want to do in the world? Even with this, how can I get there? And the rest will just sort of fall into place. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And I hope that helps. That's what a 3P perspective is.
What I love about your answer to Caroline, because I think Caroline's is a universal question. It's not about the big G when a great loved one has passed away and you're dealing. I almost think that the big G is something that at least we have lots of customs, mores, and support. We call them, I guess, kind of transition aids that will help us. When someone passes away, we've got the funeral director. We have lots of people that are helping, that are professionally trained to deal with grief a little bit. But it's these little G's that are consistently in our life that we need to really handle. And right now, I really want to address the big P or the big C, which is COVID right now. We are facing an unprecedented time in our history. And I would like to see a little bit more of that perspective that you're talking about, so that we could all be able to handle this collective grief and collective trauma that the whole world is experiencing in a little bit more positive a way. So what would you recommend? First of all, what are some of the problems that you're seeing are specific to COVID and grief? And then secondly, how do we deal with them with humor and grace? Because what's so funny about a pandemic?
Exactly. Once again, you have to give yourself permission to say, this is a trauma. This is horrible. And you can blame and shame anybody you want, and it's not going to make things change. So I need to be very clear. I'm not saying I haven't been angry at different times, but even accepting that anger, I have a right to that anger. I give myself permission to feel angry. I give myself permission to be sad. And what people don't realize, this is a trauma. This is a global trauma. So with any kind of trauma, that's when you start thinking differently. And you have to admit it is one. There are people say, no, this is all a hoax and this, and you can be angry at them, but then you're going to waste your energy on being angry instead of taking care of you. So once again, it starts with permission. Number two, it starts with perspective. Well, I think this is pretty funny, but someone just put another perspective, and you can see these through the humor on Facebook. Like, people are now using the word 2020 to describe like the ultimate nightmare, such as people will use the sentence, oh, that is so 2020. You know, like, so that's one thing. Another thing I saw, and for people, it doesn't matter whether you use these or not, most people know what they are. If you mixed up tarot cards, okay, with Cards Against Humanity, that's 2020. So people are working these different perspectives. Another one is, and seriously, they've changed it from pandemic to pandemic. So you are moving into shifting your perspective, shifting, not from looking at things in a teeny little hole, but widening your perspective to the humor that's in it. And you have to look for it, because people who want to stay angry will stay angry. Nothing I can do can fix that except continuing to be who I am. So, and the power to see it differently, the power to imagine life ahead, that yes, things will change, and they are changed forever, as all pandemics through history have changed. We will be more aware of health, and that is a good thing. We will be more aware of compassion for others. Maybe in the future, we will appreciate being out in nature, being with our family, and not taking for granted different aspects that we have lost. I mean, there is a lot of grief going on right now. It is trauma-filled. Grief that you cannot be with family in the hospital when they're dying the way we used to. Wow, who'd ever thought that would be taken away? Do you hear?
And that's something I've experienced personally during this pandemic. My aunt was in New York during the height of the pandemic in New York State. And so when she passed away, one of the tragedies, of course, was one that my relatives couldn't visit her when she was in the nursing home. Second, that her emotional and mental state was declining, so that even when they were doing the iPad and trying to speak to her, she wasn't quite catching on. And all of us want to be present with a loved one. And then lastly, and I don't mean to bring up a gruesome image to any of our listeners, but we only were able to see her body with a minister, in front of it. And that was our only view, our last view of her. And that's not not something that we're used to. And so I think this is a perfect opportunity right now to talk about some of those ceremonies that we have that assist us. And I love your TEDx talk, because you have a ceremony that had to do with your popcorn. So can you kind of start with the Humor for Peace popcorn story that I love so much?
I will. So I had been diagnosed with diverticulitis. However, things got better. And then I shared some popcorn with my granddaughter. And then 1 week later, I had a full-blown attack. Horrible, painful. And so I started to cry. I was there between the toothpaste and the bras at CVS. And I was standing there, and I started to sob in line. And my husband says, "What's the matter?" I said, "I will never be able to share popcorn again." And, he was comforting. And of course, he had to make a joke, which was a way of lifting my perspective, right? And having me take a breath. And he says, "Well, you love ceremonies. You could have a cremation ceremony for popcorn. You could just throw it in the fire. You can have the last pop." And I went, which stuns me. And I took a breath and I went, ha, you bet. I actually did have that ceremony. And so where I gave kernels of popcorn for everybody to throw in the fire. I told popcorn jokes, and I also made a headstone. I'll have to show that to you someday. It's called Colonel A. Colonel, a life well popped. So while that is making light of that, how do you help yourself and others create new ceremonies? Because 10 people celebrating at a cemetery, when you need more in homes just to do some Jewish ceremonies, right? It doesn't work. I'm going to give you a very recent example. It was the year anniversary of my cousin who completed suicide. And his family, yeah, his family at, usually there's an unveiling of the headstone and all these things. People go out for a meal. This is what traditionally has been done, and that's not possible at this point. They're also in a higher COVID area. So I went online and I rewrote a ceremony that was there, a Jewish ceremony, to celebrate the first year. And I put things in like, we're doing this ceremony because, I won't say his name, but let's call him David. David was Jewish. And then I put in parentheses, I guess he still is, right? Because even though he's dead, right? And then in it, there's some different prayers. So I wrote this out. I put it on Facebook. It got shared on his page on the first anniversary of his death. And people could partake in their own ways. If you hold fast and true to things have to be done this way, you're going to run into a lot more grief trouble. At the same time, we have to honor that it's even more grief, not that just someone died, but that you cannot do what you used to do, that you know to do with your traditions and with your ceremonies that are part of your life. I mean, look at Passover Seder. I grew up Jewish. Those were a lot of ceremonies, but I've studied Druid ceremonies and Christian ceremonies as well as Catholic ones. There's all these ceremonies, right? And they're all, it's like a combination of forgiveness and creativity to adapt. So, you know,
this is wonderful, wonderful information, because we are in a season of disruption. And like nature that comes through with a tornado or, you know, some of this, you know, the only thing constant in life really truly is change. And so when we can accept change, when we can create within disruption, when we can even create dangerously and reform, then that's when we're resilient. And so what I love about your explanation about these transitional moments or creating ceremonies is that it gives us the freedom to change the paradigm. It gives us the freedom to be creative, and it gets the freedom to actually individualize our grief and help ourselves personally as well as collectively. I have a background with grief, with ceremonies with respect to the Anasazi Foundation. And we have a ceremony at the Anasazi Foundation that we call blanket stepping, which I consider extremely important because, like you, forgiveness is one of the greatest healers for humanity. And so what we do is a blanket step from the old dark way of thinking on the old dark, you know, musty, moldy, holy, you know, dirty blanket, to stepping out into the light, into the clean, new, and beautiful way by letting go of some of these grievances, letting go of some of this anger that's holding us and tying us back. And I know that you really have some good ideas with respect to gratitude and forgiveness and how that works in releasing whatever it is that's holding back from honestly facing grief. So I'd like to ask you right now, what is healthy grief as opposed to unhealthy grief?
That is a great question, because there are almost two camps. Those that can deal with emotions and those that cannot. And when I say deal, that means accept and integrate. So a healthy grief, and there's within normal limits, it's WNL in nursing term, within normal limits. It would be totally normal to lose weight while you're grieving. You don't want to eat. It would also be totally normal to carb up every day to shove your feelings down. That's normal. That's not unhealthy. What would be unhealthy compared to that is refusing to eat at all, refusing to take any of your medication, refusing to wash yourself after 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks, refusing to use the restroom. That would be unhealthy, right? That's an extreme. People who say, and I read this in different grief chat rooms and on Facebook, people say a year later, aren't you over that? You should take that ring off by now. Why are you still talking about this? That's because they're uncomfortable. And frankly, it's none of their business. In my own case, when my mother died, we had to take care of some things very quickly, like a home, selling the home. It was a condominium, or some people have apartments and they have to clear things out very quickly. I did not touch her stuff really for about 5 years. We did all the basics, but I didn't go through a bunch of stuff that I had stored. You don't have to get rid of things unless it's bothering you. And in that, for ring theory, okay, that is a whole nother thing, but there's circles of people that you're with and that you can talk to. Out here, people will judge you, pay them no attention. I can't help their ignorance when they make comments. Why aren't you doing this now? And then the next group, you may listen to them, or you might be able to say, I'm not ready. The inner circle, they get it. They're going to leave you grieve, and they are the healthy ones. So what is healthy and unhealthy? Unhealthy is, are you in mortal danger with your grief? Losing 30 pounds is really common. When you get a divorce, you lose a job. God forbid, when you lose a child. When a child dies, whether it's a miscarriage or whether it is whatever age, they can be, in my case, my dad died when he was 39 years old. I never saw sadness like that before till I looked at the faces of my grandparents. So, people used to think when you talk to the dead, that was unhealthy. That's really normal. And claiming that they're talking back, that is also normal. It doesn't mean you need antidepressants. Now, once again, for activities of daily living, bathing, eating, washing, if you no longer can keep up with that, and your family members are seeing that, and when I see keep up, I bet there's a lot of people here during COVID that have never, that in the beginning times, they didn't change out of their clothes every day. Nobody did. It was yoga pants heaven. And so, does that mean you're crazy because you never put jeans on again? And then you gained weight? No, it means you're normal. So grief is on a spectrum, okay, of what is normal. And once again, if you're in mortal danger, yes. If you're thinking about killing yourself too, and not just, my heart is ripped out, I want to die, that is not killing yourself. But if people around you are starting to get really scared because you are doing certain things, those certain things would be refusing to take your own medication that you need for living. That would mean getting a gun and keeping it loaded next to your bedside. You know, that's scary stuff. That might need to be addressed, the person who's grief. But other than that, no. There's a whole spectrum of what is normal. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I love it. And I've got Caroline on because we have experienced, and I want to address this in the time of COVID, we have intergenerational grief going on in the time of COVID. Traditionally, young people, other than the death of maybe a relative or an older person, may not have to deal on a daily basis with death of someone in their own age group. Our family, however, has had the experience of a death of a dear, dear loved one named Raymond McIntyre, who was my oldest son's best friend. And I've experienced the grief of having him literally pass away in my car from a seizure. And so we know as young people, I know because I'm older, we experience, what we must do with older people. But right now, young people are experiencing young people going through COVID. People in their 30s are getting sick. Desada Mama, Caroline, is dealing with a lot of young mothers that have little children and trying to deal with how to raise little children with a disability. We have a lot of intergenerational grief that we need to address. And so for that, I'm very grateful to you for your book, Grandma's Bubbles. Caroline has read Grandma's Bubbles to little Aiden there, who we can kind of a little sneak peek of him right beside her. Grandma's Bubbles is a nice way to explain to young people a little bit about the transition that death is. And so I'd like you to kind of address the two things. One, what it is like for young people to suddenly be entered into this new world of grief, whether it's because now at the time of COVID, it's hard to find a job, whether economically, the millennials may be going through the challenges that they're going through, and the death of the American dream, because, in the olden days, it's kind of like, oh, if you just work hard, you can get anything, you can do anything. And now it's like, how am I even gonna find a job tomorrow? And then my friends are getting sick. And on top of that, every day I must be vigilant so that I don't get sick. So how do you speak to the younger generation to face grief? And then, of course, to the little ones through Grandma's Bubbles?
Great questions. And to minimally address that in the time that we have, I have to talk about, when I talk about collective grief, which is what people are having, it really is age dependent, because in our minds, at least in this culture, what do? Somehow we say we're sad when a 90-year-old dies. It's okay if they die, right? You're sort of saying, you get it, they've had a full life. A child dies, you go, that's a loss of everybody's dreams. So, and in between, because of the psychology that goes with an 18-year-old's brain, a 19-year-old's brain, a 23-year-old's brain, and their life experiences up to 30, 40, they do not necessarily thing the same as a 55-year-old. Okay? So for each one of those situations, a grief counselor or an aware person would need to address each one of those. The simpler answer is for a child to, like, I just want to say about myself, no one in our family could talk about death and loss. They just didn't have the emotional capacity or capability or education. So I started to pay attention to this when I'm 8 and someone says, your grandmother died, and I wasn't allowed to go to any funerals. Start, when there are funerals again, start bringing your kids to funerals. Let them see what death and life is about. And then how do you explain, people explain death to children from a Christian perspective or a Catholic one. They will often talk about, oh, they went to be with heaven. Heaven needed you. God needed you. That's not a healthy thing to say to a kid. I'm just going to say, you know, because they're always going to be on the edge. Is God going to take me away? Because does God need me? Right? So you don't want to say those things. And in my book, I wrote specifically with imagery and a practice to deal with grief. I specifically used a bubble, which is a non-religious thing, right? It's more spiritual to me. And when you watch a bubble go through its life phase, so you blow a bubble, it's growing, and there's tons of colors. And then as the bubble actually grows older, it loses its color, and then it pops. Well, where did that air that held the bubble go to? Well, it went back out so we can breathe more bubbles. And that is more of an emotional tool to share with children. Let's say their dog dies, and you go, what happened to, you know, Rover? Well, you remember that bubble? Rover was like that bubble, and when he was younger, he had, you know, all those colors. But remember when Rover was, when he's dying and when he died, he sort of got gray like that bubble. And when he died, that energy that held Rover together goes back out into the world, and you can breathe that in. You can imagine you're breathing in Rover energy. So it's about giving kids a tool at a very young age.
And I think what I like about the bubble is that it's renewable. You know, it reminds me of the song by Johnny Cash, you know, where you have the, you know, the rain and the everything, it starts over again, and I'll be back again. You know, not that I'm talking about, this is not religious, it's not reincarnation. We're just saying, we're just saying it, that there is an existence, you know, whether it's in your mind and your memory, whether it's through your religion in another dimension, whatever it is, it helps children know that it's a renewable energy. It's not just a bubble that bursts. I mean, if it was just a bubble that bursts, it would terrify me as a child, but it's a bubble that has burst and then is renewable.
Yes, so that is so good. I mean, so healthy. I don't want to say good, healthy. You know, watching monarchs, people have been really on the butterfly craze. You know what? That would be another way to take them through cycles and how that goes. Start introducing children at a young age to life cycles. I mean, on the way back, I drove our 2 grandkids, who at the time were 6 and 4, and they're arguing in the back seat. No, grandma died this way. No, grandma died that way. Wow, what a healthy thing. What a healthy argument to be using the word death. So,
Thank you so much, Deborah. I really love this. I see that you've got grandma's bubbles behind you. Are you able to put it onto the screen so we can at least look at it?
can you
And
see
grandma,
it? Is it backwards?
oh, it's perfect. It's Grandma
Yay!
D's bubbles. And I guess you can find most of this information at deborahjoyhart.com. Is that correct?
Yes, you can
Well,
also find my TEDx talk there. You can find uplifting articles. There's a way, like spiritually minded articles. There is my TEDx talk, my NPR talk. I won an award for this book too. Yeah,
oh, tell us about your award. What award was that?
it was American Book Fest. I became one of the finalists in the, let's see, Death and Dying. Yeah, I
Oh,
don't
wow.
feel so bad. It's like I was runner up because the other two were doctors from Johns Hopkins. Oh yeah, I got that award fair and square. Oh yeah. So yeah, so it won
Well,
an award.
Deborah, I just can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for this wonderful, courageous conversation. And the reason we call these courageous conversations is because I really believe that communication and dialogue is the best conflict management solution for everything. And so I'm hoping that during the time of COVID, we can have more courageous conversations with Courage Keepers to help us to deal with these challenges that we're facing, and in your case, that we face every day. On behalf of Caroline Wells and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for Caroline because Caroline is doing such a great job in dealing with young families, and I think she's doing a great job with Disauto Mama. I see she's gotten off right now because she's been dealing with her two little ones. She has a 9-month-old and a 3-year-old, and I think that all generations can benefit from the information that you've given us, Deborah. I love the idea that we can face grace with grief with humor and grace. And I want to thank you for that thought. Is there anything that would be one final thought that you'd like to give our audience as a farewell idea for us to keep in the time of COVID?
I do. Many people say it many ways. Look for things that uplift you, things that put a smile on your face. It's okay to shut the TV off. It's okay to shut off social media. It's okay to not like what people are posting. Give yourself permission to feel. And lastly, when in trauma, you don't have to make a joke. Things can bubble up organically, and you will know the timing. I don't tell people to be positive. I tell people to be present. And that's what is most important. Be present to yourself and others.
Oh, thank you, Deborah. It's been a wonderful, wonderful time with you. I'm looking forward to having other moments that we can share with one another. I'm going to direct everyone to not only this courageous conversation, but we're going to feature you on Courage Keepers, and also to have everyone please go on to deborahjoyhart.com. I love that her middle name has joy in it. So it's DEBRA for Deborah, DEBRA, joy, heart, HART.com. And until then, we sign off with a little bit of humor and a little bit of peace. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for having me.